Good afternoon, and welcome to The Briefing, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Jay Willis, senior contributor at The Appeal, and your host for this afternoon. We're joined today by Austin Mayor Steve Adler to talk about the crisis of police violence in Austin, And Mr. Mayor, I know we only have a little time. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to get into as much substance as possible. So as we know, Austin has the highest per capita rate of police shootings during mental health calls among the 15 largest US cities. And in April, police there killed an unarmed man, Mike Ramos, during a confrontation outside of his South Austin apartment complex. His death, in combination with the recent police killings elsewhere of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Rayshard Brooks, and tragically so many others, have led to sustained protests both in Austin and across the country. Now, when these protests began, you issued an open letter calling for a number of police reforms, including Campaign Zero's 8 Can't Wait policies on use of force. Now, when you issued this letter, I understand that Austin had 3 of these recommendations in place already. And since then, the Austin City Council has passed resolution number 95, placing additional restrictions on police use of force. But Campaign Zero itself has acknowledges that those steps are just, interim steps, not solutions. So I want to ask you about some additional measures that the city of Austin could take to eliminate police killings and police violence. So for example, Louisville recently passed Breonna's Law in the aftermath of the death of Breonna Taylor, banning the use of no-knock raids in the city. In that resolution number 95, I understand that Austin is restricting them, placing heavy restrictions on them. Would you support moving that to a ban? Why not go all the way in that instance? Mr. Mayor, you got to unmute though.
Sorry, I apologize.
Not at all.
I don't know that we shouldn't go all the way. I know that we wanted to act real quickly in that moment and put on real severe restrictions for those kinds of raids. It wouldn't surprise me if we don't move in that direction, but it certainly has now focused the discussion on the last of those restrictions.
Is publicly supporting a ban something you'd commit to right now? Is that something you're ready to do?
I do, because I don't see a basis for it. I think that the harm outweighs the advantage associated with that. It wouldn't surprise me if the city doesn't move in that direction officially. And I think that's where it stands. We acted really quickly. We wanted to make sure we could get an ordinance that was passed immediately.
I also want to ask about the resolution's treatment of military equipment used by the police. It says that it's going to reduce the use of military equipment, the acquisition of military-style equipment, to the greatest extent possible. I'm wondering, why not decommission its use altogether? Would you support to barring the use of existing military equipment that the Austin Police Department has or uses?
I do that too. But again, I'm in an area and talking about something that I recognize that I don't know everything there is to know about these areas. From what I know, I support that. That's why we acted so quickly as a city and moved in that direction. But we recognized at the time it was part of a longer debate and study, and we wanted to move real quickly with the understanding and knowledge that we had. At this point, no one has come to me with a defense of military style equipment that is needed to be sustained.
So help me understand what needs to happen for your position to move from restricting its use to barring it altogether. What does a timeline on that look like? How do we go from sort of this intermediate policy of restricting its use to a more concrete, tangible, easily understood prohibition on its use, perhaps the decommissioning of existing equipment in use?
Well, as part of the work that has now started in terms of reimagining how policing works, we're looking at lots of different things to be able to move to, associated with the budget that's being adopted right now, but also the things that might not happen in this budget, but will be programmed in. When that discussion came up, I will tell you that we had not had a lot of conversations in front of our council about no-knock raids, about the use of military equipment. We acted real quickly because we wanted to act immediately. We want to give people the opportunity to be able to express opposing views before we take more complete action. But I didn't want to hold up, and the council didn't want to hold up moving immediately. But the whole conversation now about what policing is and what it needs to look at, the larger conversation on public safety in the community is the conversation that we are presently engaged in.
I understand. Tell me about a timeline for that transition. When do you expect to be able to support legislation to do the things we're talking about here, banning no-knock raids, banning the use of military equipment?
I would hope that we have reached finality on those issues and many other issues, as many as we can immediately and within the next few months. Again, this is one of the highest priorities of our city right now.
What are some, you mentioned you wanted to hear opposing views before moving forward. What, in your view, or what are you hearing rather, about opposing views? What are the arguments for retaining the use of military equipment, and how is that affecting your thinking, if at all?
I haven't heard any. That's what I said just a moment ago. I haven't heard in the space that's been created a defense of either not removing the restrictions on the no-knock raids or maintaining any ability to be able to buy military style equipment.
I understand. I want to turn to a slightly different topic.
Sure.
We're talking about reimagining public safety and perhaps shifting some responsibilities away from what we might call traditional law enforcement policing to other sorts of first responders. So there's a study just released by the Austin Justice Coalition finding that a majority of 911 calls in the city handled by police are not related to crime. I've got 21.5% that address crime, and about 0.5% of calls are about violent crime. And the study concludes that calls for much steeper police budget cuts to pay for some alternatives to, again, traditional law enforcement would be justified. And I know this has been a topic discussed in Austin for a while. The Human Rights Commission discussed this last year. The city's Public Safety Commission issued recommendations about it. Where does that debate stand now, and how much money are you willing to commit to the creation of an alternative first responders program?
It is a conversation that wasn't just initiated with the most recent events. All the bodies that you mentioned, also the mayor's task force on institutional racism and systemic inequities, also looked at this and looked at institutional racism, not just in policing, but in all the other aspects that make up civic society: access to capital, education, housing, healthcare delivery. But with respect to the question that you're asking, I think that there is keen interest in making sure that the police are not the way that our community interacts with poverty in our city. One of the things that we have begun to pilot and now are expanding in the current budget is the mental health intervention aspects. I think that people pretty uniformly don't believe that the first response to a mental health intervention should be necessarily a sworn officer with a gun. So I think that that's a significant area. Police shouldn't be our social workers. So I see those kinds of efforts starting right now. There's no set up institution right now for those responsibilities to fall to, which means we have to stand that up right now in order to be able to make that transition. And I'm hoping that this is something that we're doing pretty quickly.
How much money do you support committing to that?
You know, I have not looked at it in terms of setting a monetary goal. I think we need to, because I don't know what the right answer is to that. I think that I'm focused more on making sure that we from a functional standpoint, in our city, don't respond to everything with a police officer in those situations where there are better things that we can do. violent crime in our city is going up, but the violent crime that's going up is predominantly family violence. And I don't think that increasing the number of police officers on the street help us address domestic violence. If we were to increase the capacity of the organizations that provide safer places for spouses or partners to go when they're threatened, so that they have an alternative to staying in a home, that probably will have significantly greater reach. We're not set up to do that yet, but I think that's something we need to get in a position to be able to do.
Maybe I can incorporate a little bit broader discussion of the police budget in Austin. So last year, Austin spent about $500 million of its annual budget on policing. And just for reference, that's about 16 times more than the $27 million spent on the neighborhood housing and community development. Now, the current budget proposal includes a slight budget cut to APD by about 2.5%, $11 million. You initially responded by saying that you wanted more significant cuts to the police budget, but last month you also said that you weren't prepared to support cutting the police budget by $100 million, which was a number floated by some city council members. So what I want to make sure I understand is, how much are you willing to commit to support cutting from Austin's police department? Where are we at here? We talked about 2.5%. Would you go as high as 10%? Perhaps 5%, doubling the existing proposed cuts? Where's your head right now?
Same question you asked a moment ago. Let me try to answer it differently this time. I don't know whether 5% or 10% or 50% is the right number in terms of the percent cut to make, because it's not the cut to me that I'm focused on. It's moving the functions. It's figuring out what it is that's a better way to do mental health interventions in the city. It's figuring out what we can do in order to decrease the amount of domestic violence that's increasing in our city. It's trying to figure out how, when we have our police officers making a disproportionate number of medical calls, as does our fire department, as does our EMS. I don't understand why it is that those three functions then are handled independently in three different agencies. Now, what does that mean in terms of fixing that, in terms of percent of the budget? I don't know the answer to that, but we have now set on the path to work through those issues so that we can move to a very different place than we're at right now. So I don't know what the number is, and I don't want to undershoot that number. But what I have said to my community is, we have a budget process that's coming up almost immediately on top of what we've seen happen in our community with this moment and with this movement. And I think there's a lot of people in the community that want to see us change things. So I am not concerned that everything has to happen in the first 4 weeks of this process. If it takes 8 weeks to get it done or 12 weeks to get it done, I think we have to look at this budget as not being a budget that we're about to pass that gets set in stone, that sets where we are over the next year. I want us to stay immediately engaged in this in an iterative kind of way, so that over the course of the year, as we figure out exactly what kinds of responsibilities we can move out in a way that makes our community safer, I want us to do that without regard to budget cycles. I want us to be focused on the outcomes that we can achieve. So I don't know where the number is. What I've said is $100 million. I like $100 million insofar as it is descriptive of the scale of the challenge we face, the scale of the reimagining and rethinking that we should be doing. But I don't know what $100 million means in actual steps and actual movements. I want to see fundamental, transformational, generational change.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of understanding what you're saying here about you want to make sure that these cuts are carefully considered and that they're part of sort of a broader long-term plan of reimagining public safety. Let's say this study process that you're talking about, this careful budgeting process, it comes back and a cut of $100 million, which you at first said that you weren't as sure about, that a cut of $100 million is part of this plan. Do you then support that?
Yes.
Thank you for your time. I know we're short on it today. Austin Mayor Steve Adler, Thank you for being with us on the briefing, and folks at home, thanks for tuning in.